McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad that you're along with me. Always wonderful to hear the music, the statement of Gary Hines and the Sounds of Blackness, Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. And that song resonates with me and I think the world right now, because all of us in the country, in the city, in the world, focused on the trial underway of Derek Chauvin, accused in the murder of George Floyd about a year ago. We're going to spend most of today's program talking about that with esteemed guests who are lawyers. But before I begin with that panel, I want to take a minute to connect with Dr. Michael G. Wolf, who is an educator and technologist. Dr. Wolf is the CEO of WebDemoZ. I may be saying that wrong. You can correct me. And also founder and executive director of the Minnesota STEM Partnership. And we wanted to take a minute, Dr. Wolf, to talk about your vision, your passion, and your desire to ensure that we move and create leaders, move our community towards being empowered through technology and creating the leadership that we need to advance humanity itself, but our people in particular. Good afternoon and welcome, Michael Wolf.
Thank you. It's great to be here, sir.
Well, talk about your projects, the Minnesota STEM Partnership in particular. What is the mission and what's the vision?
So I'll start out first by saying I reached a point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, that it resonates deeply. You know, Brother Hines is always creating dope music. However, this mission to create an organization that would help kids in the community that didn't have access to advancing and emerging technologies is at the forefront. There are a plethora of opportunities for students to learn basic coding, to learn some of the basics of technology. However, I found myself in a situation being a VIP guest, and the participants didn't look like anybody on this call, right? And we're all male, but there were no African American distinctly that I would walk in and say there is enough of us to be like, okay, this is Minnesota, right? And so, Mr. McFarlane, you said this is a for real conversation, so I'm going to try to wipe away all the corporate ease and all the legal ease, gentlemen, respectfully, to really
and call me Al, please. Al.
Okay.
Keep it informal. Okay.
All right. Well, Al, the organization started really by being able to do something and give back. I've been very honored and blessed to be supported throughout my years, being an intern, participated in many organizations, but it was my time to give back. I never envisioned growing an organization with staff, with, you know, the concept of multi-million-dollar budgets, with being able to impact thousands of kids in the community, to have the incredible partnerships and relationships that we have. But it all started by one single vision of saying, instead of trying to focus in on what's here in the short run, how can we set the end point to be a point where the students are going to live and participate or be consumers in, right? Instead of them being the consumers of this, let's start teaching them the fundamentals of what artificial intelligence is, robotics, how to actually code and think like a human thinking, right? Machine learning, and then package all those things in a 3-year plan that would grow towards the ultimate goal of having students come out of high school well-equipped, confident, being able to present, being able to understand the fundamentals and concepts of high tech, being able to have relationships built with these incredible companies that are around here that are looking for opportunities based on the next conversation that your group will have. Is very important that they are now investing and reinvesting into organizations like ours. Fast forward from starting a couple of robotics teams competing in a couple of regional scrimmages, we went from 3 teams. Now we had on book 22 robotics teams alone. Keep in mind, we have a multifaceted organization, but we're looking at an onset of maybe 40, 50 robotics teams alone right in urban Twin Cities. We're not talking about proliferation across suburban and rural, but our focus is to identify these families, these churches, these schools, that just need the infrastructure and the administration capable of helping enable them so that the kids can begin their learning process. Hats off to Mayor Carter over in St. Paul. We are now partners in a robotics league for the city of St. Paul. We have partnership with Minneapolis Park and Rec. And so these are just a couple of the great and lasting partnerships that we're going to build and grow from. But our end game is not necessarily to be a certified educator, right? We're an enabler. We're sick and tired of our kids not having the opportunity to get those same resources that are available to maybe more financially capable school districts, right? The other thing is not disparaging any school districts, but we all know that Minnesota ranks dead last in graduation rates for African American males and African Americans in general. So our kids are not in school to be able to participate in these after school clubs and these after school programs. So we're coming out with robotics clubs, gaming league, right? That's going to be huge in the city of Minneapolis. We start a league here this summer. We're talking about coding. We're talking about donkey cars or, artificial intelligence devices, virtual reality. All these elements are components that we're providing to the kids. But the difference is I have 36 years of technology experience. I've been, in IT architecture for a long time. And this is my time to be retired. I am not financially motivated. We are not looking to, build enough labor so that we can drive around in fancy cars or just spend a bunch of money. Every single dollar that we have has a purpose and a reason. It goes right back to the kids. But the reality of it is we need money to be able to do these things. So I'm just blessed to be in a position where, I have the skills and capabilities and all these other factors in my life at this point in time to be able to give back. And that's really the short of it. A few other demographics is we are in near North Side. We're at 1200 Plymouth. We are the anchor STEM. We're STEAM, or you include science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics in STEAM. That particular facility.
You're in the old workforce building there at Plymouth.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So Jamez Staples and a group of other individuals and organizations are creating a regional technology training center as well. So on top of the building, there's solar panels, there's battery backup units, but this fall they're going to start training people how to install electrical vehicle stations, how to build solar panel deployments, right? Because if you have major companies like Ford, Chrysler, GM, some of the big players are going electrical vehicles in 9 years from now completely. We don't want to wait till the 8.5 year to say, oh, look at what's coming, right? Why don't we start today? And that's a real man conversation, a real adult conversation, right? Not to be sexist, but that's where we have many great people on our staff, Lindsay and others. We have a whole spectrum of age, diversity, and we're looking at trying to make a difference in high tech, starting out as grassroots, but also soliciting and partnering with major people in the community that you all know are participating with as well.
Quick question to wrap this up with: what are the barriers? What's needed? What's blocking our movement and progress in this arena? And with that, assume those barriers are dismantled or no longer exist. What can we expect as the product of this initiative, this energy?
If you ask me that financial, be able to enable the communication, to be able to go out and door knock, to be able to do some, marketing, to be able to get the correct message out there to say that these things are possible. I know firsthand, I did something that many people are impossible to do. I had to prove to everybody that, look, if I'm going to ask these little kids to do something unimaginable, what is the biggest obstacle for me? I start with me, with everything that I do. I lost 115 pounds and it wasn't easy, but I knew I can't convince somebody else of something I can't do myself, right? education, discipline, all these things. That is what we're bringing into the organization. And that is to be able to get the word out. Other barriers are transportation, food, right? We're going to be running summer programs. We need to be able to feed the kids because we're not a school. We're not Title I, enabled. So it's actually kind of the human basics that we need. And I believe that we will be able to attract the students to the program here. Also in St. Paul in the Rondo neighborhood, we have a new facility moving in thanks to the JK movement. Johnny Allen Jr. over there is giving us space through his organization. So we'll have 2 robotics and STEAM hubs in both cities. So we need to be able to get the kids there and be able to feed them. And these kids are incredible. There are absolute certifiable geniuses walking around the neighborhood, right? We just need to give them the constructive, the belief that these things are real. You can do these things.
Say, listen, thank you. Thank you so much. That's great. Stick around because we're going to talk generally about our peoplehood. I want to shift the focus to talk about the Derek Chauvin trial in particular. But I always know that all these things we talk about are related. They're connected. And there's a way to bring into context your vision for enabling and empowering Black boys and girls in the discussion of the crisis that our country is in right now. What I'm talking about right now, we are focused on the trial of Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin being tried in Hennepin County Court, accused in the death of George Floyd about a year ago. I think we're at day 9 of that trial. And I asked friends of mine, even more than friends of mine, lifelong friends, and in one case, a relative, to join me and have a conversation. And the kind of conversation I want to have is one that people that have known each other for a long time can have with a degree of frankness and a degree of confidence that we know what each other is motivated by. So let me introduce my first cousin, Professor Burnell Venable Powell. Burnell Powell is emeritus, distinguished Professor Emeritus and Miles and Ann Lodholt Chair of Law at the University of South Carolina. Burnell and I have known each other since, well, he's 6 months older than me, so we were born. Burnell, good to see you again, and good to have this conversation with you. And then joining the conversation is Kamal King. Kamal King and Burnell and I went to school together in Kansas City. Burnell and I, obviously, from kindergarten on through junior high for sure. But I think, Kamal, you came to our neighborhood when we were in about the 5th or 6th grade, maybe the 4th grade. But you're a 3rd grade, and you're a lawyer as well, retired lawyer from Coca-Cola in Atlanta, Georgia. You're joining us from Atlanta. And the 3rd person in the legal team is a close friend and a neighbor of mine here in North Minneapolis, Clinton Collins Jr., who's a lead lawyer for Geico Corporation and followed me as the chairman of the board of the Minneapolis Urban League. So, gentlemen, I want to put this on the table, and I'll start with you, Burnell Powell. How should we look at what's going on in this trial? How many ways can we examine how this trial is progressing, how it's proceeding? What can we learn about it as ordinary citizens? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that I would start by saying that as we look at this trial, we can see it as part of, a rollout of history. We can think about what we would have imagined this trial would have been like, let's say 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now today. And we can ask ourselves, to what extent have we made progress with respect to this trial? Now, I submit that because as I was listening to Dr. Wolf, I was thinking about Kamal and I and you when we were growing up. And the battle at that time was for us to convince Mr. Woods and Mr. Palmer, Robert Palmer and Jack Woods, that they would have a little league baseball team. And now we're talking about putting bringing our youth together to work in the STEM area. That represents a lot of progress. I think as we look at this trial, we ought to be asking the same kinds of questions. Have we made progress over the last decades in terms of bringing justice to individuals and to communities, specifically Black and Blacks, people of color, those individuals in our society who've been systemically marginalized, and ask ourselves what steps have we taken? What still needs to be done?
Clinton, how closely are you watching the trial here locally? Clinton Collins?
Somewhat. I mean, I've been following more this, the summaries at the end of the day, and the written media reports. I haven't listened to too much direct live testimony, but I've seen some of the more important replays. So I have a general sense of what's going on.
And so give us a sense of how things stand from the point of view of an attorney who's on the ground here in Twin Cities, who's a resident, who's a citizen, who knows all the players, or many of them, and knows the principles as they have existed in our town, our neighborhood. What do you sense are the expectations of our community and also the apprehensions of ordinary people as this trial unfolds? What are you hearing?
Well, I'm sure what I'm hearing is that people think, well, can we really get a conviction here? Or will it be similar to other trials in the past where the officers end up getting off for what appears to be real egregious conduct? This case appears to be different in that, for the first time in my memory, you have the complete support of the police apparatus in the city condemning what happened. I think the testimony of Chief Arredondo stating in no uncertain terms that what Chauvin did was inappropriate was powerful, not only in the sense that he was ultimately Chauvin's boss, but that this man is the chief of police. He's risen through the ranks. He knows the procedure, and he made it very clear that there were boundaries that Chauvin crossed, which is huge. And in the fact that other police officers have come forward and testified that his behavior was egregious and didn't follow proper police protocol. Other than maybe the trial with the former police officer Noor, who, as you recall, was convicted for the death of this woman from Australia who was white. I can't remember a time in which the police department itself came out so strongly in condemning the conduct of the accused officer. And I think because of that, and there are other reasons as well, but I think especially because of that, I'm confident that there will be some kind of conviction in this case.
The pushback on that, Clinton Collins, is that on the street, on the ground, people have this sense of almost limitless power, a parallel structure of power in the police union. And things don't happen to policemen no matter what they do. The exception being the case you mentioned with Muhammad Noor being sentenced to prison for the killing of Justine Diamond, I think, a year ago. But outside of that, generally, the feeling on the street is that people believe the union is almost as powerful as the chief of police and the mayor, and protects the men in blue. And so, are you hearing that? Are you seeing that not as big a problem this time around, or has it simply not surfaced yet? Clinton, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's been as big a problem. Now, some people would say that, well, the police union is paying for Chauvin's defense. Well, basically, Chauvin purchased an insurance policy through his union that would provide him for legal representation if he were in a situation like this. I mean, something similar to the car insurance we're all supposed to have, that's supposed to provide us with legal protection if we're in a lawsuit. I mean, that's what I do for a living. So the fact that they are honoring their contractual obligation is a lot different than hearing and seeing vocal support from the police union of Chauvin. And this time around, there has been very little vocal support of Chauvin from the police union or from police in general. Now, maybe some individual cops are saying things behind the scenes, but just think back to other trials of this nature, not only here, but elsewhere in the country, in which you would hear heads of the police union saying things like, don't rush to judgment, everyone is entitled to a defense. There are extenuating circumstances. Police have to make life and death split-second decisions. You're not hearing that this time. And in fact, across the country, not only here in Minneapolis, but across the country, police officers and members of police unions have criticized Chauvin's conduct. I think they realized this time that the fact that he had his knee on Chauvin's neck for such a long time, 9 minutes, that just is very hard to defend. And as I've said, they've been pretty quiet publicly. So I understand the hesitation of people on the street, the reluctance to believe that justice will occur this time. But in addition to the things I just pointed out, Keith Ellison has been in a unique position. He's been able to, since he took over the case from Hennepin County, and now the case is being prosecuted through his office by the state attorney general, he was able to pick his dream team. He was able to go out and get the very best lawyers who, by the way, the private lawyers are working pro bono to prepare this prosecution. And so this time around, you have a black attorney general in the state, Keith Ellison, who was able to put together a great team, including several leading black attorneys, to provide the prosecution based on a set of egregious facts that even ardent police supporters have been reluctant to support, at least publicly. When you put all that together, I think that this is the best opportunity we in the black community have had in a long time of actually seeing justice.
Kamal King, jump in. Thank you for being on the call. And how does it look for you? You did criminal law for a while before you went into the corporate arena, but you've been watching this case. What are your impressions? What are your thoughts?
Okay, let me say thank you for inviting me first, Al. And Dr. Wolf, you were calling him Mr. McFarlane, and I have to stop calling him Al. When we were kids, he was Alvy. So now it's Al. Thank you for the invitation. When I look at this trial, I think about what John Lewis said when people would tell him that we made no progress. And John Lewis' response was, if you walk in my shoes, we made a lot of progress in this country. We've only been, Black people have only been free from slavery for 166 years. And after what was it, 1865, we had maybe 5 years of, quote, being treated as equal citizens. And then along came, I guess it was Andrew Jackson, and Reconstruction ended and lynching started. Last month, my wife and I went to Alabama, Selma, Alabama, to the Justice Initiative that Byron Stevenson started. And if you're familiar with that initiative, part of the museum is he has steel plates hanging from a ceiling, and those steel plates represent a lynching, and hundreds of lynchings, all the way up until probably about the late 1940s. I think was the last lynching here in Georgia, about 50 miles from where I'm sitting right now. So from the late 1800s up until about the early 1950s, lynching was commonplace. No, no trials, or if there was a trial, the people got off. Emmett Till. And then along came Dr. Wolf and technology. Thank God for technology. And we were able to see what happened to Rodney King. A group of policemen just standing around, just beating him. And these police were found not guilty. Now, I have to back up to police. In the South, the police were actually, they came from the slave catchers, all right? And so there was a culture in the South with regard to police. In Atlanta, you didn't have your first police officer until about early 1950s, and they couldn't arrest white people. Black police officers couldn't arrest white people. So there's a culture, a deep ingrained culture in the South with police, and they protect each other. And it's almost like, if you remember back in the 60s, you couldn't find a doctor to testify against another doctor.
Right.
That's gone away now. Same thing with lawyers. Lawyers protected lawyers up until very recently. All right, because there were rules put in place with regard to, if you see something, if you're a lawyer and you see something happen, or see another lawyer do something that's unethical, then you're responsible. All right. So the police have not accepted this self-policing thing. They circle the wagons. They're still circling the wagons. That's why it's been so it's been so amazing to see other police testify against Chauvin. Now, if it wasn't on camera, if it wasn't caught on camera, I'm not certain we would have that. But because it was so egregious, there's no way to protect this. Now, the last thing I'm gonna say on this one is, I hope that what happened with Rodney King doesn't happen in Minnesota. But under our legal system, it only takes one juror to hang the jury up. One juror to hang the jury up. And in spite of, just like Rodney King, in spite of the evidence that's on the camera of the beating, if one juror, just says, I'm not going to convict him, then you guys going to have to go through this all over again.
So Professor Powell, Cousin Brunell, if there is a hung jury, what should the prosecution do? Do we walk away saying, oh, we tried? What happens in the public? The concern here, go ahead.
I think we're at a flex point here as a country, and the prosecution ought to be sending at least signals out that no matter what happens in this case, if there's a need to retry this case, it's going to be retried. And this is one of those cases that is so important in terms of where we are socially as a country. We are only a couple of months following a group of individuals leading an assault on the Capitol with the intent of bringing democracy to an end. In that kind of environment, in the wake of that, the prosecution has got to make it absolutely clear that no matter what happens, this case is going to have to come to some sort of conclusion. Now, of course, the other side of that is that we've got to look at the Black community, people of color, people of goodwill who have been paying a lot of attention to this case. And we've got to ask, well, what is their responsibility in the event that this jury unexpectedly decides, well, he's not guilty? I would say that this case is so important that I fear a major explosion. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope that the that the jurors here basically heed their lying eyes, as the song goes. Who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? Well, in this instance, everybody has got to believe their eyes. We know what we saw, and we are expecting an outcome that reflects that.
Brunel, I know you as a expert in ethics, in legal ethics, and I always enjoy asking you to explain to me, to share with me what ethical considerations are applied to any particular issue. And I know that when Chief Medaria Arredondo testified last week, one of the points he made was that the behavior of Derek Chauvin did not meet the ethical and I think he said other standards of the department. Where does the question of ethics come in? At what level in this trial?
Well, I think that Kamal touched on it when he referenced the what is it, the thin blue line. That police, the tradition is that police don't testify against each other, but they are a club and they're protecting themselves against the outsiders. In a professional organization, you have a set of standards that are mutually agreed upon by all members in the organization, and they hold themselves accountable for that. And the question is, has the Minneapolis Police Department reached the point where they can truly call themselves a professional organization? Well, the point's already been made that we have to ask ourselves at this point, what would have happened had there not been video evidence in this case? And in asking ourselves that question, what we are really saying to ourselves is, do we believe that this police department is a professional organization in the sense that we have historically understood professional to mean, which means that the body itself will hold its membership accountable? I'm hoping that that's where we are. The police chief's testimony in this case and the work of the others involved in this case indicates that we've certainly taken some major strides since Rodney King, but we are not sure yet. We've got to see this trial, and we've got to see the next trial and the trial after that before we can reach any conclusions.
Based on those other three police officers, especially the one who was keeping the other guys off, keeping the citizens off, none of them raised their hand to help this man.
Well, remember, there was one who did. First of all, I think that they were all relatively new to the police force, but one of them did say, should we turn him over, or something to that effect. And he was rebuffed by Chauvin. No, basically told us to stay in line. And he fell in line, and he did move forward to try to police the crowd. So there was a little bit of an indication that maybe stirring in his subconscious was an idea he ought to have some independent duty that's owed to the police department and not owed to Chauvin. But in the end, he failed.
Let's go over, gentlemen, and review the consequence or the nature or the intent of the three charges. The one charge, second-degree murder. The next charge, third-degree murder. The third charge is second-degree manslaughter. What are the differences in those charges, and why is it important to have those options on the table in front of the jurors?
I'm assuming
you can start.
Collins that.
Yeah. Clinton, go ahead.
And culpability. I mean, manslaughter, the least onerous charge, if you will, basically is saying that you killed someone, but that wasn't your intent, and your behavior was certainly negligent, but it doesn't look as though you were planning to do it. And each degree above that indicates a greater degree of knowledge and, for lack of a better term, foresight. Now, he wasn't charged with first degree murder, which would be that you were planning beforehand. You know, I guess in that scenario, that would mean that Chauvin knew that day or sometime before it happened that he was going to try to kill George Floyd, and that's not the case. So that wasn't charged. But the other charges, as I've said, what the prosecution is trying to do is essentially hedge its bets. Even if they feel pretty confident that they have enough evidence to succeed on a more serious charge, I always tell my clients before every trial I've ever had, and now, I've done legal work with you over the years, and I told you the same thing. You never know what a jury is going to do, and so you want to give yourself the maximum flexibility. So what the prosecution is doing, or what they've done by having the varying level of charges, is they're saying, look, we believe in our case, we think we're going to get him, but in order to make sure that we have something that sticks, we're going to provide a variety, or at least an option for the jury, because when they get back and deliberate, there are going to be some people who will want to hang Chauvin. There are going to be some people who are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And by having different levels of charges, hopefully the jury can come up with a compromise that they can all live with.
Murder charge, which would have required that there be an intent to murder her. I think, as a technical matter, first-degree murder could have been charged in this case. I mean,
Yes.
I previously referenced the fact that Chauvin was asked, "Can we turn him over?" Well, there were some other instances in which there was thought given to what Chauvin was doing, which might have served as a predicate for saying he really intended that his actions caused the death of this person. But it would have been a much higher level of proof necessary. And so, I think that Ellis has to be given not just the benefit of the doubt, but he has to be recognized as understanding the complexity of the jury trial. Now, the jury trial, it's complex for a reason. The British, in terms of ruling over their colony, were pretty ham-fisted in terms of the ways in which they would achieve a verdict, and all the way from appointing their own people to the jury, to not providing a jury at all, to putting it in cases in front of judges who they knew were going to decide the case as the state wanted. But the jury system was put into place because the idea was, if we can have decision makers who are drawn from a cross section of the community, the chances are that we are going to get something that approaches justice. I guess today we would say at least rough justice. We may not be able to get perfect justice, but if we can get individuals who have pledged that they are going to make the decision on the basis of their own independent examination of weighing of the evidence, that's pretty good. It's a good process, and we will hope that that process will lead to a fair verdict, and a verdict, because they are all members of the community, a verdict that the community will accept. So we've got a trial here in which we have jurors who are, if not pulled from an exact cross section of the community, or certainly fairly widely represented. Some of them are professionals. You got non-professionals. You have men, women. You have people of various socioeconomic classes. That's a pretty good start.
Yeah, I think Ellis did right. When when they
Ellison, you mean Ellison?
Excuse me.
Yeah, when they charged him with second-degree murder, the crowd went up from people that I know. Why wasn't it first-degree murder? And as Brother Collins explained, it's a higher bar. But the intent, he could have done it, because intent can be found even though you didn't wake up with the intent to do that day. The intent can come from the circumstances. Like Brunel said, when they refused to turn him over. No, I don't want him turned over because I want him dead. Therein lies the intent, but that's a harder thing to prove. I believe in my mind that he intended to kill him. I believe that the intent was there to kill him, but to prove that intent would have been very difficult.
So what's happened? We were in like day 9 now, and I think, as I understand it, as a layman, that the trial to this part has been the presentation of the prosecutor. That's what has been happening with the defense examining and challenging some of the witnesses and the ideas put forward. When the prosecution finishes its presentation, what happens next? What can we expect? What should we look for? And what is the strategy of the defense team here? Clinton, and then everybody else.
Okay. The first thing he's going to do, the defense is going to do, is to ask for a directed verdict. A directed verdict is a verdict saying that the prosecution haven't presented the evidence necessary to prove any of their charges. So that's the first thing he's going to do. And this guy, this defense attorney, I think he's doing an excellent job with what he's got to work with. He's just trying to chip away at any little thing that he can. Any little thing that he can. So I just want to say that first. He's going to ask for a directed verdict, and then he's got to come up with a defense. And that's going to be the interesting part. What is his defense?
How's that work, Clinton?
Yeah, well, basically, yes. After the motion on directed verdicts, which is absolutely correct, then the defense presents its case. They'll call their witnesses. I think of what will be really.
Will it be the same witnesses or different witnesses? Will it be the same witnesses again or different witnesses?
Well, it depends. I mean, first of all, they will start off with their own witnesses. They have the option to recall a witness for rebuttal purposes. But what I was getting to, the real question is, will Chauvin himself testify? And if I were the defense lawyer, I would not have him testify. I think that from a strategic standpoint, for one thing, Chauvin doesn't have to testify. The prosecution has to prove its case. So, and they have the burden. And the accused does not have to stand in their own defense. But having said that, in a case like this, everybody is wondering what was going through Chauvin's mind. But if he were to take the stand, that means he could be cross-examined. And that cross-examination would be absolutely brutal. It would be no holds barred. So I don't think they're going to call Chauvin. What they're going to do is what they hope will be perceived by the jury as credible medical experts who will give them the ammunition to argue that Floyd's death was medically non-related to Chauvin's body pressing on his neck. I mean, that's their strongest defense, and then they're going to try to suggest as much as they can that Floyd was a poor character, that he was a drug user, that he was a criminal, and even though that should have absolutely no bearing, the reality is it will be in the back of some people's mind. And there are some people, not necessarily, and hopefully not on this jury, who believe that if you're quote unquote a bad person, as they define it, then you get what you deserve. And what the defense is going to try to do, besides use the medical evidence, is to suggest that Floyd was a bad person. and that he was doing things that inevitably were going to place him in a bad situation, and that what happened to him was not an unforeseen outcome. If I were the defense, that's the approach I would take in the witnesses I presented.
Mhm.
Brunel, what do you think?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I want to jump in to say that I think today was the pivotal day in this trial
Yeah.
because the prosecution had a Dr. Martin Tobin, or maybe it's Tobin, Tobin, who's a pulmonologist, testified today.
He's
And
on now.
yes, and all that I can say is I think that Tobin's testimony will be taught in law school trial advocacy courses for the next couple of decades. It was an extraordinary presentation in which he basically went through, based on his expertise in terms of the way in which the body operates, the lungs operate, and his background. I believe he has a background in physics, and he was able to talk about how the breath was in effect squeezed out of George Floyd. And he, at one point, was able to identify the point at which Floyd had stopped breathing, and then to point out that it was 3 minutes and 21 seconds later before the knee was removed from his neck. And he was able to point to the physical activity that you could observe on the screen to establish where he was in terms of each stage of the loss of life. It was, I think, just absolutely devastating testimony. And it's for that reason that I would agree with Mr. Collins. I hope I can call you Clinton now, since we've been on.
You can call me that from Jump Street.
But I totally agree that it is unlikely that he will take the stand. But if he does take the stand, I think that what it will say is he is absolutely desperate, and that he's basically concluded, I have no other place to go except to take the stand.
Well, Brunel, what about the question, the news report that early on there was a potential for a plea bargain or accepting third degree charge that was later taken back? What's your thought about that? One of the early discussions was that there was on the table an agreement to plead guilty.
The jury will never learn of that. That can't be a part of the trial. But it does indicate to me that he fully recognized that this was an uphill climb. I don't know specifically why it was that he withdrew the offer. It may have just been an informal offer, but he certainly backed away from it. I think that it may have had something to do with what the prosecution was willing to accept in terms of the overall disposition of the case. But it was an early indication that he understood that the evidence in this case is really quite substantial, and that it would have been better if it could have been resolved to have been resolved without a trial. And even now, I think if I were the defense counsel, I would at least have a quiet conversation during the breaks about whether there's some chance that we could just end this before this trial has run its course at this point, unless they believe that they have a witness who's going to be equally effective in terms of measuring up against Tobin.
Question.
Clinton, need to mute your mic, Clinton, when you're not talking, because I'm hearing your background noise.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Question.
Come on.
Okay, sure.
What's the maximum time that he's facing if he's convicted of second-degree murder? What's the maximum time in Minnesota?
Clinton would answer that, I think.
I'm maximum. To be honest, I'd have to look it up. I know that with second degree, he would be looking at a minimum at least 12 years. But in terms of what the maximum would be, I'm not sure. I'd have to go to the statute books to find out. But put it this way, it could be a substantial amount of time. That much I can say with confidence.
Okay. Minimum would be 12, though, huh? About 10 to 12. Yeah, minimum. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Listen, we're out of time. This hour has gone fast. I wanted to throw back to Michael Wolf for a quick comment. Michael, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Impressions, thoughts, and the question behind my question is, how does technology, as we've seen it, be a focal point of bringing this question to court, to trial? How does technology impact what will happen in our community from your point of view? The availability of information, transfer of knowledge, information, disinformation, what's the impact?
Well, I can say this is that the mere existence of the video camera and the recording of the entire incident by non-public officials, to me, that's one immediate impact of technology. Had it not been recorded, we would all not be shaking our head knowing what the outcome of this could be. As a technologist, I'm very proud of, in particular, some of the schools in the Minneapolis Public School District who are putting in forensics and using GPS locators and using optical recognition. And then our organization, for instance, having culturally relevant impact in understanding that the technology was not designed by African American. Let me rephrase that. Certain technologies were not designed by African Americans or persons of color. For example, facial recognition, right? That's been proven over and over. That's why Caucasian men were always able to be easily recognized. But I will say that it will change it dramatically and significantly as we get into monitoring and having more and more data accessible to us as we equip, our communities with high-speed networking, with 5G and other advancing technologies.
Listen, we're out of time. I want to thank my guest today. Thank you, Michael G. Wolf. Thank you, Burnell Venable Powell. Thank you, Kamal King. And thank you, Clinton Collins. I'm hoping that you all will be available to do another conversation like this in perhaps a week or so, just to monitor the trial. I think it's that important. I think this event is an inflection point for this community and perhaps for the world. And I'd like to go deep in discussing the meaning of where we are right now. But thank you each so very, very much. And we'll connect afterwards, okay? Burnell? Thank you, Burnell. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Clinton.
All right. Thank you. Good job, man.
Pleasure meeting.
Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.